"Are you absolutely sure you want to be a beggar, Erin?" Jared asked, his voice dripping with mock pity as he tapped the 50-page divorce decree. "Once you sign this waiver, you walk out of here with zero." Erin didn't blink. She picked up the Mont Blanc pen, the ink flowing smoothly over the signature line. "I'm walking out with my integrity, Jared. You're the one who needs the money." He chuckled, sliding the paper toward his new fiancée. He had no idea Erin had just handed him an anchor, not a lifeline. The climate-controlled air inside the Century City law offices of Vanguard and Hayes was a crisp 68 degrees, a stark contrast to the sweltering Los Angeles heatwave baking the asphalt of Santa Monica Boulevard outside. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling, triple-paned glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the sprawling expanse of the mahogany conference table. At one end sat Erin. She wore a simple, tailored navy sheath dress, her posture impeccably straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Beside her, vibrating with a barely suppressed righteous fury, was her attorney and oldest friend, Lily. Lily was a shark in a Chanel suit, a woman who had negotiated settlements that made Hollywood tabloids weep. Yet today, Lily was practically vibrating with frustration, not at the opposing counsel, but at her own client. At the opposite end of the table lounged Jared Foster. He was the picture of newly minted, arrogant wealth. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit in a shade of charcoal that screamed aggressive success. His tie loosened just enough to suggest he was a busy visionary who didn't have time for the mundane details of dismantling his 10-year marriage. His left wrist bore the heavy, platinum gleam of a Rolex Daytona. And seated entirely too close to him, violating every unspoken rule of legal mediation decorum, was Rebecca Turner. Rebecca, former junior marketing associate at Foster Wealth Management, current VP of Strategic Partnerships, and Jared's soon-to-be fiancée. She wore an ivory blazer that matched her blindingly white veneers, her wrists stacked with Cartier love bracelets that clinked loudly every time she reached over to unnecessarily touch Jared's arm. "Let's review the terms one final time," Jared's attorney, a balding man named Peterson, said with a distinct tone of disbelief. He pushed his half-moon glasses up his nose, looking at the document as if it might suddenly bite him. "Mrs. Foster, you are formally waiving your right to the primary residence in Calabasas. You are waiving your claim to the Aspen ski chalet. You are waiving spousal support, alimony, and any stake in Foster Wealth Management." "That is correct," Erin said softly, her voice steady. "Erin, I am begging you," Lily hissed under her breath, her manicured nails digging into her legal pad. "He built that firm during the marriage. California is a community property state. You are legally entitled to 50% of everything. That's at least $30 million. You cannot just walk away with nothing." "I am not walking away with nothing," Erin replied, not breaking eye contact with Jared. "I am walking away with my name, my personal laptop, and my freedom." Jared let out a sharp, condescending chuckle. He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Always the drama queen, Erin. If you want to play the stoic martyr for the judge, be my guest. But don't come crawling back when your little savings account dries up and you realize you can't afford a studio apartment in Burbank." Rebecca giggled, a sharp, crystalline sound that grated against the quiet dignity of the room. "We did offer her a generous severance from the company, Jared. It's not our fault she's being stubborn." Erin's gaze shifted to Rebecca. There was no malice in Erin's eyes, no jealousy, only a profound, unsettling pity. Rebecca mistook the look for defeat and smirked, adjusting her posture to better display the 6-carat emerald-cut diamond Jared had already placed on her right hand. The truth of the matter, the truth that Erin held close to her chest like a shield, was far more complex than a simple narrative of a scorned wife. 10 years ago, Jared was a struggling finance major, drowning in student debt. It was Erin, a brilliant but introverted data analyst, who had quietly written the predictive market algorithm that became the foundational bedrock of Foster wealth management. She had let him take the credit because she loved him, because he was charismatic and could sell the product, while she preferred the quiet sanctuary of code and data. But over the last 2 years, Jared had changed. The success had corroded him. Erin had discovered the rot 3 months ago. It wasn't just the late nights with Rebecca. It was the ledgers. Erin had bypassed the company firewalls out of a nagging sense of suspicion and found that Jared was artificially inflating returns, leveraging client capital in high-risk offshore ventures to fund his lavish lifestyle. It was a sophisticated, digital house of cards, a Ponzi-light structure teetering on the edge of a catastrophic collapse. If Erin fought for the money, she would be fighting for tainted assets. She would be anchoring her future to a sinking ship of federal crimes. Her choice to leave with nothing wasn't a surrender. It was a highly calculated surgical amputation. She was cutting away the gangrene before it could infect her. She refused to take responsibility for his fraud, but she was taking absolute responsibility for her own future. "Just sign the damn papers, Peterson," Jared snapped, suddenly irritated by the lack of begging from his soon-to-be ex-wife. He wanted tears. He wanted a fight to validate his ego. Erin's serene indifference was maddening. Let her have her grand, empty gesture. Lily looked at Erin, her eyes pleading one last time. Erin gave her a tiny, resolute nod. Defeated, Lily slid the final decree across the table. Erin picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen, a gift she had bought Jared for their 5th anniversary, which he had ironically brought to sign their divorce papers, and signed her name, Erin Vance. She was dropping Foster immediately. As they stood to leave, the heavy oak door of the conference room swung open, and Grace Foster swept in. Jared's mother was a woman who weaponized passive aggression like an art form. She took one look at the signed papers and let out a dramatic sigh of relief. "Oh, thank heavens it's over," Grace declared, clutching her Hermes Birkin bag as if Erin might try to steal it. She walked over and kissed Jared on the cheek, then offered a warm smile to Rebecca. Finally, she turned to Erin with a look of faux sympathy. "Well, Erin, I suppose you'll be moving back to the Midwest. I always said Los Angeles was too fast-paced for you. Take care of yourself, dear. It's a harsh world out there without Jared's protection." "It is a harsh world, Grace," Erin said, her voice smooth as glass as she picked up her simple leather tote. "But I think you'll find I'm much better equipped for it than you assume." Without another word, Erin turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving the three of them to revel in a victory that was, in reality, their death warrant. The Los Angeles sun was blinding as Erin stepped out of the high-rise elevator and onto the bustling pavement of Avenue of the Stars. She didn't call a cheap cab, nor did she head toward a rundown motel as Jared had undoubtedly pictured. Instead, she pulled out her phone and ordered an Uber Black. Her destination wasn't an apartment complex. It was Van Nuys Airport, the premier hub for private aviation in Southern California. During the grueling hour-long drive through LA traffic, Erin allowed herself a single deep breath. The emotional weight of the past decade sloughed off her shoulders. She felt a profound sense of clarity. She had taken the high road, yes, but more importantly, she had taken the smart road. True karma wasn't about waiting for the universe to magically punish bad people. True karma was the inevitable, mathematical consequence of unsustainable actions. Jared's math was fatally flawed. Hers was perfect. The Uber pulled up to the heavily secured gates of the Signature Flight Support Terminal. The driver checked her ID against the manifest, and the gates swung open, revealing a pristine tarmac dotted with gleaming aircraft. Erin bypassed the luxurious passenger lounge and walked directly out to the tarmac, where a stunning Gulfstream G650ER stood waiting. Its sleek, white fuselage caught the afternoon sun, the dark, tinted windows revealing nothing of the interior. Standing at the bottom of the air stairs, looking casually elegant in a charcoal cashmere Loro Piana sweater and tailored slacks, was Joshua. Joshua Sterling was a name whispered with reverence in the corridors of Silicon Valley and Wall Street alike. A tech billionaire, venture capitalist, and the sharpest mind in algorithmic logistics, Joshua was a man who played three-dimensional chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He was also the man who had been secretly trying to poach Erin from Foster Wealth Management for 3 years. "I see you didn't bring any emotional baggage," Joshua said, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his face as she approached. He extended a hand and helped her up the final steps. "I left the baggage in Century City," Erin replied, stepping into the aircraft. The interior of the Gulfstream was a sanctuary of quiet luxury. Cream-colored leather captain's chairs, burled walnut tables, and the faint, reassuring scent of expensive coffee and aviation fuel. As the heavy cabin door sealed shut behind them, muting the outside world, Joshua gestured to the plush leather sofa in the aft cabin. "I have to admit, Erin," Joshua said, taking a seat across from her and pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. "When my legal team reviewed the public filings of your settlement, they were stunned. You walked away from an estimated $30 million, even knowing what we know about Jared's creative accounting. That takes a terrifying amount of discipline." "It wasn't discipline, Joshua. It was self-preservation," Erin said, accepting the glass. "If I took a dime of that money, I would be tied up in the inevitable SEC investigation. Jared has over-leveraged client funds by nearly 40% to cover his personal real estate investments. When the market corrects, and my data shows it will within the next quarter, Foster Wealth Management will implode. I wanted a clean break. I want no part of his mess." Joshua nodded slowly, his sharp blue eyes studying her with intense respect. "Responsibility and truth, a rare combination in this town. It's exactly why I want you to run Sterling Dynamics' new AI predictive division." Erin looked down at her hands. The ring finger of her left hand felt oddly light. "I've spent the last 10 years hiding behind a man who used my intellect to build a monument to his own ego. I enabled him, Joshua. By staying quiet, by handing over my code, I allowed him to defraud people. I have to take responsibility for that." "And you are," Joshua said firmly, leaning forward. "By refusing the money, you broke the cycle. Now, how are we going to fix the damage?" "I have the uncorrupted version of the algorithm," Erin said, a spark igniting in her eyes. "The original source code. Jared only has the patched, degraded version that is currently bleeding his accounts dry because he doesn't know how to optimize it for the current volatility index. We are going to build a transparent, aggressively ethical firm. We are going to offer his clients a lifeboat before his ship sinks." "I like the sound of that." Joshua smiled, raising his glass. "To clean slates." "To the truth," Erin countered, clinking her glass against his. As the Rolls-Royce BR725 engines roared to life, pushing the jet effortlessly into the California sky, Erin pulled her laptop from her tote. It was the only physical asset she had taken from the marriage. It was all she needed. For the next 6 hours, flying at 40,000 feet toward Joshua's private estate in Montana, where they would set up their war room, Erin didn't look back. She coded. She strategized. She transformed from a discarded wife into a lethal, focused architect of the future. Jared thought she was nothing without him. She was about to prove that he was literally nothing without her. 6 months passed. In the world of high finance, 6 months is an eternity. For Erin, it was a period of intense, exhilarating rebirth. Tucked away in the cutting-edge laboratories of Sterling Dynamics, she built a revolutionary predictive model. She was named Chief Technology Officer, her stock options instantly making her a formidable player in the tech sphere, though she kept her profile meticulously low. She worked relentlessly, driven by the pure, unadulterated joy of creating something honest. For Jared Foster, those same 6 months were a slow, agonizing descent into a self-made hell. It started subtly, a missed projection here, a slight dip in a major client's portfolio there. Jared, arrogant and complacent, blamed the market. He yelled at his junior analysts, demanding they fix the damn computer. But there was no one left to fix it. Erin was gone, and with her went the nuanced understanding of the code that kept the firm afloat. Jared tried to mask the bleeding. He and Rebecca ramped up their public displays of wealth, operating on the delusion that looking rich was the same as being rich. They bought a Ferrari Roma in a garish shade of red. They booked a massive 200-person engagement party at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Rebecca's Instagram was a relentless feed of designer shopping bags, first-class boarding passes, and smug captions about living my best life with my king. But the walls were closing in. On a crisp Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week before the final divorce decree was mandated to be officially entered into the court record by a judge, Jared sat in his corner office, sweating through his custom shirt. His private phone rang. It was Grace. "Jared, darling," his mother's voice trilled through the receiver. "My black card was just declined at Neiman Marcus. It was the most humiliating experience. Fix it immediately. Mother, I'm moving some liquid assets around today. The accounts are just frozen for a security check." Jared lied smoothly, though his hand shook as he rubbed his temples. "Well, hurry up. And Rebecca is driving me insane about the floral arrangements for the wedding. She wants orchids flown in from Thailand. Tell her to settle down. She's acting like new money." "I'll handle it, Mum," Jared snapped, hanging up. He immediately pulled up the firm's master ledger. It was a sea of red. To cover the massive losses in the tech sector, he had illegally transferred millions from an older client's retirement trust, hoping to day trade it back into the black. He had lost 40% of it in a week. The algorithm was broken, outputting erratic, nonsensical trades. Suddenly, his office door burst open. Rebecca marched in, her face twisted in a petulant scowl. "Jared," the jeweler called. "They said the wire transfer for my wedding band didn't clear. It's $150,000, Jared. Why didn't it clear?" "Because we have a cash flow issue, Rebecca," Jared finally exploded, his carefully curated facade cracking. "Stop spending money for 5 minutes." Rebecca recoiled, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me. You told me Erin left you everything. You told me we were set for life." "We are. I just need time," he growled, turning back to his monitors. What Jared didn't know was that time had run out. That very morning, an anonymous, highly detailed whistleblower report containing indisputable blockchain evidence of wire fraud and embezzlement had landed on the desk of the regional director of the SEC. The report was surgically precise, leaving absolutely no room for deniability. It was a masterpiece of data compilation. Meanwhile, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the San Francisco Bay, Erin sat calmly, sipping green tea. Lily, her lawyer, was on the speakerphone. "The final court date is set for tomorrow at 9 a.m. at the Santa Monica Courthouse," Lily said, her voice crackling with anticipation. The judge just needs to stamp the final decree to make the dissolution of assets official. Jared's lawyer insists they want you there in person to sign the final waiver in front of the judge. It's an intimidation tactic, Erin. Jared wants to parade his victory one last time. Erin looked across the table at Joshua, who was leaning against the glass, a faint smile on his lips. "Let him try," Erin said smoothly. "I'll be there." "Are you flying commercial down to LA?" Lily asked. "I can send a car to pick you up at LAX." "No need, Lily," Joshua interjected, his voice deep and authoritative. "Erin and I have a meeting in Los Angeles tomorrow afternoon, anyway, regarding the acquisition of some distressed assets. We'll be arriving together." "I'm looking forward to it, Lily," Erin added. "Jared wanted me to walk into that courtroom with nothing, and I will. I'll walk in with no lies, no guilt, and no debt. But I won't be walking in alone." Erin closed her laptop. The trap was set. The karma wasn't just coming. It was already here, descending from the sky at Mark 0.9. The Santa Monica courthouse on a Tuesday morning was a chaotic intersection of human misery and bureaucratic indifference. The brutal Southern California sun baked the concrete plaza, radiating a dry, unforgiving heat that made the palm trees lining the street look wilted and exhausted. There was no rain to wash away the smog, only a sharp, glaring light that exposed every crack in the pavement. Jared Foster arrived exactly 15 minutes early, treating the mandatory court appearance not as a legal necessity, but as a coronation. He pulled his least cherry-red Ferrari Roma into the loading zone, ignoring the frantic whistle of the parking attendant. He stepped out, adjusting the lapels of his midnight blue Tom Ford suit, a veneer of absolute confidence masking the acidic churn of panic in his stomach. His phone had been vibrating incessantly for the last 2 hours, automated alerts from his offshore accounts signaling catastrophic margin calls. He had swiped them away, terrified to look at the actual numbers. Rebecca slid out of the passenger seat, her stiletto heels clicking sharply against the asphalt. She wore a skin-tight, optic white Alexander McQueen dress that was entirely inappropriate for a morning court proceeding, clutching a crystal-encrusted Prada micro bag. Close behind them, stepping out of a trailing black Escalade, was Grace Foster. She looked appropriately somber in a Chanel boucle suite, though her eyes darted around, calculating the social standing of everyone in her immediate vicinity. "I can't believe we have to actually walk through the public entrance," Grace complained, fanning herself with a thick, embossed court summons. "Jared, couldn't Peterson have arranged for us to use the judge's elevator? It smells like despair out here." "Just smile and walk, mother," Jared muttered through gritted teeth. "This is the last time we ever have to deal with Erin. After the judge stamps this waiver, the asset division is sealed. Let her have her pathetic little moment in front of the magistrate." As they approached the main steps, they noticed a massive cluster of people blocking the entrance. It wasn't the usual crowd of disgruntled plaintiffs and public defenders. There were 3 distinct, aggressive clusters of paparazzi, their heavy cameras equipped with telephoto lenses. Several local news vans from KTLA and Fox 11 were parked illegally on the curb, their satellite masts extended. "Oh my God!" Rebecca gasped, her face lighting up with unearned delight. She aggressively pushed her chest forward and touched her hair. "Jared, did Peterson tip off the press about our engagement? This is amazing." Jared frowned, his heart skipping a beat. "No, Peterson wouldn't do that. It's probably for that reality TV star who got the DUI last week. Just keep moving." But the cameras weren't pointed at the courthouse doors. They were pointed down the street. A heavy, synchronized rumble shook the pavement. A motorcade was approaching, not the flashy, desperate kind, but a display of terrifying, institutional wealth. 2 matte black Range Rovers flanked a massive, pristine, midnight blue Rolls-Royce Cullinan. The vehicles glided to a halt, perfectly aligned with the courthouse steps, completely blocking Jared's Ferrari from view. The paparazzi erupted into a frenzy of flashing bulbs and shouted questions. Dozens of bystanders, sensing the sudden shift in gravity, pulled out their smartphones. In an era where TikTok and YouTube Shorts dictated the cultural narrative, a scene like this was algorithmic gold. Teenagers waiting for traffic court and junior law clerks on their coffee breaks all held their lenses high. A man in a sharp, understated black suit stepped out of the lead Range Rover and opened the heavy rear door of the Rolls-Royce. First to emerge was Joshua Sterling. The tech billionaire didn't wear a tie, his crisp white Brioni shirt open at the collar, paired with impeccably tailored trousers. The crowd murmured in immediate recognition. Joshua Sterling didn't do public appearances. He didn't do court. His presence in Santa Monica was the equivalent of a great white shark swimming into a community pool. Then, Joshua reached out a hand. Erin stepped out into the blazing sunlight, and the collective breath of the crowd hitched. She was unrecognizable from the quiet, accommodating woman who had sat in the Century City conference room 6 months prior. She wore a bespoke, slate-gray Dior suit that fit her with weaponized precision. Her hair, previously kept in a simple, practical style, fell in sleek, dark waves across her shoulders. She wore no excessive jewelry, no flashy logos, only a vintage Patek Philippe watch on her wrist. She radiated a calm, devastating authority. Is that Erin?" Grace whispered, her jaw dropping as she clutched her Birkin bag like a shield. "Who on earth is she with?" "That's Joshua Sterling," a young paralegal standing next to Grace supplied helpfully, holding up her iPhone to record the scene. "He's worth like $40 billion. He just bought out half of Silicon Valley." Jared froze on the steps. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pallid grey. His mind short-circuited. He had convinced himself Erin was living in a studio apartment, clipping coupons, drowning in regret. Instead, she was arriving at their final divorce, proceeding flanked by a man whose net worth made Jared look like a panhandler. Erin and Joshua walked up the steps, completely ignoring the flashing cameras. They moved with a synchronized, terrifying purpose. As they reached the top of the stairs, Erin finally locked eyes with Jared. There was no anger in her gaze, no lingering sorrow. It was the detached, clinical look of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "Good morning, Jared," Erin said, her voice clear and carrying over the murmur of the crowd. Jared tried to speak, but his throat was bone dry. He swallowed hard, attempting to muster a sneer. "Nice rental, Erin. I see you found a new sugar daddy to fund your dramatics." Joshua didn't even look at Jared. He looked straight through him, checking his watch. "Let's go inside, Erin. We have a board meeting at 1, and I'd like to acquire his client list before lunch." Rebecca, deeply offended by not being the center of attention, stepped forward. "Excuse me, but Jared is the one keeping the money today. You're walking out of here with 0, remember?" Erin paused at the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. She looked back at Rebecca, a flicker of genuine pity crossing her features. "I'm walking out of here with everything that matters, Rebecca, but you should probably check your fiancé's bank accounts before you plan that wedding." Without waiting for a response, Erin and Joshua entered the building, leaving Jared standing in the stifling heat, acutely aware of the dozens of smartphone cameras pointed directly at his panicked, sweating face. The viral video was already being uploaded. Department 47 of the Santa Monica courthouse was heavily paneled in dark oak, smelling faintly of lemon polish and decades of broken promises. Judge Helen Miller, a no-nonsense woman in her late 60s who had overseen thousands of bitter dissolutions, sat at the elevated bench. She adjusted her reading glasses, looking down at the massive stack of paperwork representing the end of the Foster marriage. "All right, let's get this over with," Judge Miller said, her voice echoing in the cavernous, quiet room. "I have the final settlement agreement here. Mr. Foster, your counsel has submitted the waiver of assets signed by Ms. Vance. Before I stamp this and enter it into the public record, making it irrevocable, I need verbal confirmation from the petitioner." Jared, having regained a fraction of his bravado inside the courtroom, stood up at the plaintiff's table. Peterson, his lawyer, sat beside him, looking faintly ill. Rebecca and Grace sat in the first row of the gallery, whispering furiously. "Yes, Your Honor," Jared said smoothly, shooting a triumphant look across the aisle. "My ex-wife has graciously decided to waive all claims to Foster Wealth Management, our real estate portfolio, and any liquid assets. We are ready to finalize." At the respondents' table, Erin sat beside Lily. Joshua sat directly behind Erin in the front row of the gallery, his arms crossed, watching the proceedings with the detached interest of an apex predator. "Ms. Vance," Judge Miller said, turning her attention to Erin. "I must inform you that this is highly unusual in a community property state. Given the valuation of Mr. Foster's firm, which was built entirely during your 10-year marriage, you are legally entitled to half. Once I stamp this, you cannot come back in 5 years and claim financial duress. Are you absolutely certain you are of sound mind and wish to proceed with walking away from tens of millions of dollars?" Erin stood slowly. The room held its breath. "I am of sound mind, Your Honor," Erin said, her voice ringing clear and steady. "However, I am not simply walking away. My attorney, Ms. Vanguard, has a brief addendum to file before the decree is stamped." Jared frowned. "Objection, Your Honor. The mediation is closed. We aren't renegotiating." "I'll hear it," Judge Miller snapped, waving Jared down. "Proceed, Counselor." Lily stood up, opening her leather briefcase with theatrical slowness. She pulled out a thick, bound document, marked with heavy red federal seals. She walked it up to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. "Your Honor, my client is indeed waiving all rights to the assets of Foster Wealth Management," Lily stated, her voice slicing through the room. "But she is also, simultaneously, filing a formal declaration of innocent spouse relief, backed by a sworn affidavit and extensive forensic accounting logs. We are officially petitioning the court to sever all of Ms. Vance's liability from the debts, criminal penalties, and impending federal restitution regarding her husband's estate." Peterson shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the floor. "What on earth are you talking about, Lily? There are no debts. Foster Wealth Management is highly profitable." Lily turned to Peterson, offering a terrifying shark-like smile. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, Peterson, your client's firm is insolvent. He has over-leveraged client trust accounts by 42% to cover massive losses in offshore algorithmic trading. An algorithm, I might add, that he broke because he didn't understand the source code my client wrote." "That's a lie!" Jared roared, his face turning purple. "She's making this up to ruin me. You waived the money because you were weak, Erin." "I waived the money, Jared," Erin said, turning to face him fully, "because I don't want to go to federal prison. The money isn't yours. It belongs to the clients you defrauded. I refuse to take a single tainted dollar from a system built on theft. I am taking responsibility for my code by ensuring it can no longer be used to steal." Judge Miller was rapidly skimming the document, her eyes widening behind her glasses. "Counselor Vanguard, this includes blockchain routing numbers and what appears to be highly classified KSEC whistleblower documentation." "Yes, Your Honor," Lily said smoothly. "My client spent the last 6 months compiling undeniable proof of wire fraud, embezzlement, and violations of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. She submitted it anonymously to the Securities and Exchange Commission last week. We are requesting the severance of liability today because, as we speak, the assets Jared Foster believes he is keeping no longer exist. As if on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud, authoritative crash. 3 men and 2 women entered. They weren't bailiffs. They wore dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FB emblazoned across the back, accompanied by 2 impeccably dressed agents from the SEC's Enforcement Division. The courtroom descended into absolute, stunned silence. "Excuse me, Your Honor," the lead FBI agent said, stepping past the wooden barricade. "We have a federal warrant for the arrest of Jared Foster on 7 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and grand larceny. We also have a federal injunction freezing all bank accounts, physical assets, and properties associated with Foster Wealth Management." Jared collapsed into his chair as if he had been shot. The color drained entirely from his face. His carefully constructed reality shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. He wasn't keeping the house. He wasn't keeping the cars. He was keeping a federal indictment. Judge Miller looked from the federal agents to the terrified Jared, then down to Erin, who remained perfectly composed. The judge picked up her heavy rubber stamp, pressed it into the ink pad, and brought it down hard on the divorce decree. Bang! The dissolution of marriage is finalized. Ms. Vance's liability is officially severed, Judge Miller declared, her gavel coming down with finality. "Mr. Foster, I believe you have some new counsel to retain. We are adjourned." The hallway outside Department 47 was absolute pandemonium. The news of the FBI raid had filtered out to the press, and public gathered outside, and by the time Jared was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, a sea of smartphones and cameras were waiting for him. The YouTube content creators and TikTokers were practically salivating. "Jared! Jared! Is it true you stole $100 million?" A young man with a gimbal-mounted phone yelled, shoving it near Jared's face. Jared, his Tom Ford suit rumpled, his hand secured behind his back, stared blankly ahead, hyperventilating. The platinum Rolex on his wrist suddenly looked absurd, a glittering handcuff of his own making. But the true viral moment wasn't Jared's silent shock. It was the catastrophic meltdown occurring 10 feet behind him. Rebecca was screaming, not crying, but shrieking with a primal, terrifying rage. The illusion of her grand, wealthy lifestyle had just been vaporized in less than 5 minutes. "Get your hands off my bag," Rebecca shrieked at an SEC agent who was calmly explaining the asset forfeiture protocol. "This is a Prada. Jared bought it for me." "Ma'am, the bag was purchased using a credit card tied to a fraudulent corporate account," the agent replied with robotic patience. "It is considered evidence of stolen client funds. Hand it over, please. We will also be needing the 6-carat emerald-cut ring on your finger, as the jeweler has officially reported the wire transfer for its purchase bounced at 9:15 a.m. "No!" Rebecca wailed, backing against the wall as a dozen phone cameras recorded her every humiliating second. "He told me he was a billionaire. He told me she left him everything. You can't take my ring." Nearby, Grace Foster had collapsed onto a wooden bench, clutching her chest. "My black card," she kept muttering to a bewildered janitor. "They declined my black card at Neiman's. How am I supposed to pay for the country club?" Amidst the chaos, the screaming, and the flashing cameras, Erin walked out of the courtroom. The crowd instinctively parted for her. She didn't gloat. She didn't take out her phone to record. She walked with the quiet dignity of someone who had just survived a raging fire by building her own exit. Jared, struggling against the marshals holding him, caught sight of her. Desperation clawed at his throat. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic, hollow terror. "Erin! Erin! Please!" Jared choked out, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "You have to help me. Tell them. Tell them you wrote the algorithm. Tell them it was a glitch. You have Joshua Sterling's money now. You can bail me out, please." Erin stopped. She turned and looked at the man she had loved for a decade, the man she had sacrificed her own ambition for. The camera zoomed in, capturing the stark contrast between his pathetic, handcuffed state and her absolute composure. "I didn't do this to you, Jared," Erin said, her voice soft but perfectly clear, cutting through the noise of the hallway. "Math did. Truth did. You built a life on a foundation of lies, and you expected me to prop it up. I chose to take responsibility for my own life. It's time you take responsibility for yours." "I'm nothing without that firm," he sobbed, the reality of federal prison finally crushing him. "You were nothing with it, Jared," Erin replied simply, "because none of it was real." She turned away, leaving him to the flashing lights and the merciless judgment of the internet. Joshua stepped up beside her as they reached the elevators, smoothly guiding her away from the circus. He pressed the button for the lobby. "Well," Joshua said, a quiet, impressed smile on his face. "I believe that went precisely according to your projections. The data never lies, Joshua," Erin said, leaning back against the cool steel of the elevator wall, letting out a long, shuddering breath. "The market corrects itself, and so does life." "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone shifting to genuine, grounded concern. Erin looked down at her left hand. The ghost of her wedding ring was finally gone. She felt lighter than she had in 10 years. "I'm more than okay," Erin smiled, a real, radiant expression that reached her eyes. "We have work to do. Let's go buy Foster Wealth Management's legitimate client list for pennies on the dollar and show them what an honest algorithm looks like." "Now you're speaking my language," Joshua laughed. As the elevator doors closed, sealing them away from the noise, the viral videos of Jared Foster's downfall were already hitting 1 million views. The karma was absolute, public, and permanent. But for Erin, the past was finally dead. The future was unwritten, and for the first time in her life, she was holding the pen. By the time the sun set over the Santa Monica Pier, casting a bruised, smoggy orange glow across the Pacific Ocean, the video of Jared Foster's courthouse arrest had already fractured the internet. It wasn't just a localized news story. It was a bona fide global phenomenon. The algorithmic gods of YouTube and TikTok had seized upon the visceral contrast of the scene. The shrieking fiancé, the sobbing billionaire in the Tom Ford suit, and the utterly serene, perfectly tailored ex-wife walking away in her slate-grey Dior to step into a Rolls-Royce Cullinan. It was the ultimate modern morality play, condensed into a 60-second clip. Within 48 hours, the hashtag #FosterFraud had 3 billion views. Major YouTube financial sleuths and commentary channels dedicated hour-long video essays to dissecting every frame of the arrest. Thumbnails featuring Jared's terrified, sweating face next to bold red arrows pointing to Rebecca's confiscated Prada bag flooded the trending pages. The internet, a collective entity that rarely agreed on anything, united in its absolute, gleeful roasting of Jared Foster's shattered ego. Meanwhile, 400 miles north, far away from the flashing bulbs of Los Angeles, Erin Vance was sitting in the immaculate, glass-walled conference room of Sterling Dynamics in Palo Alto. The air conditioning hummed a quiet, steady rhythm. The massive windows offered a panoramic view of the Santa Cruz Mountains, the sky a brilliant, cloudless azure. Erin wasn't looking at YouTube. She wasn't reading the thousands of comments calling her the Queen of Quants or praising her icy departure. She was looking at a sprawling, deeply complex spreadsheet displayed across an 80-inch interactive monitor. The bankruptcy trustee has officially seized all remaining liquid assets of Foster Wealth Management, Joshua Sterling said, walking into the room. He was dressed in his uniform of understated billionaire casual, a charcoal Brunello Cucinelli sweater and dark denim. He placed a cup of artisanal matcha on the table next to Erin's laptop. The federal injunction is airtight. Jared's defense team, which currently consists of an overworked public defender, because his retained counsel dropped him when his checks bounced, is trying to argue for bail. The judge laughed him out of the room. "Good," Erin replied, not taking her eyes off the data. But Jared's incarceration doesn't fix this spreadsheet. He wiped out the retirement funds of 42 families, Joshua. He used their pensions to leverage his short positions on speculative crypto startups. "Erin, you are not legally responsible for that," Joshua reminded her gently, leaning against the edge of the conference table. "The court severed your liability. The innocent spouse relief declaration protected you. You are free. I am legally free, yes," Erin said, finally turning to look at him. Her eyes were sharp, devoid of the exhaustion that had plagued her during the last years of her marriage. "But I wrote the foundational code that gave his firm legitimacy in the first place. I built the engine, he just drove the car into a crowd. I refuse to sit in a glass tower in Silicon Valley and pretend that my hands are entirely clean just because I didn't hold the steering wheel." Joshua's expression softened into a look of profound, quiet awe. In a tech industry obsessed with disruption and entirely detached from consequence, Erin's fierce adherence to personal responsibility was staggering. It was the reason he had spent 3 years trying to hire her. "So what is the play?" Joshua asked, crossing his arms. "Sterling Dynamics has the capital. You have the blueprint. Tell me how we fix it." "We buy the wreckage," Erin stated, tapping a key on her laptop. The spreadsheet shifted, highlighting a specific block of data in bright green. "The bankruptcy court is going to auction off Foster Wealth Management's legitimate client list and the remaining uncorrupted physical assets to try and generate pennies on the dollar for the victims. I want Sterling Dynamics to buy it. All of it." "You want to acquire your ex-husband's dead firm?" "I want to acquire the clients," Erin corrected, her voice resolute. "I am launching Vance Analytics under the Sterling umbrella. We are going to deploy the original, uncorrupted version of my predictive algorithm. But this time, it will operate on an entirely open ledger, blockchain-verified system, radical transparency. Every client will have real-time access to the exact logic matrix driving their investments. No shadows, no offshore shell companies, no glitches that allow a CEO to skim off the top." She stood up, walking toward the window, looking out over the sprawling tech campus. "And we are going to use the first 3 years of Vance Analytics' corporate profits to establish a restitution fund. We are going to make Jared's retail victims whole. Dollar for dollar." Joshua let out a low whistle. "That is an aggressive, highly unconventional business model, Erin. The board might push back on allocating projected profits to a philanthropic restitution fund." "Then you remind the board that without my algorithm, they don't have a predictive AI division at all," Erin said, turning back with a cool, uncompromising smile. "And remind them that the PR value of the Queen of Quants, restoring the stolen pensions of middle-class families, will generate more institutional goodwill than $100 million in traditional marketing." Joshua smiled, a genuine, delighted grin. "You are terrifying, Ms. Vance. I'll have my legal team draft the acquisition papers for the bankruptcy court by noon tomorrow. For the next 8 months, Erin worked with a relentless, punishing focus. She didn't grant a single interview to the ravenous media. She ignored the endless requests from true crime documentary producers. While the world obsessed over the ashes of her past, Erin was quietly, methodically building the future. She hired a team of 50 elite data scientists, engineers, and ethicists. She built a corporate culture predicated on absolute truth and accountability. She was healing not through time, but through action. She was rewriting the karma of the universe with lines of pristine, incorruptible code. 14 months after the dramatic scene at the Santa Monica courthouse, the federal criminal trial of the United States versus Jared Foster commenced in downtown Los Angeles. By this point, the saga had transcended mere news. It was a cultural obsession. The trial was broadcast live on a dedicated YouTube legal network, drawing daily concurrent viewership that rivaled major sporting events. The internet had turned the courtroom into an interactive coliseum. A live chat scrolled furiously alongside the video feed, a relentless waterfall of commentary, emojis, and armchair legal analysis. Jared looked nothing like the arrogant billionaire who had sneered at Erin across the mediation table. He had aged 10 years in 14 months. His tailored suits had been replaced by a baggy, ill-fitting grey suit provided by his public defender. His hair was thinning, his posture slumped into a permanent curve of defeat. He sat at the defense table, furiously chewing on a cheap plastic pen, flinching every time the prosecution introduced a new exhibit. The prosecution's case was a masterclass in forensic destruction. They didn't just tell the jury that Jared was a thief, they showed them the math, and the internet loved every second of it. The most devastating blow didn't even come from the government. It came from Rebecca. In a desperate, ill-advised attempt to salvage her own reputation and pivot into a career as an influencer victim, Rebecca had launched an apology tour. 2 weeks before the trial, she appeared on a massive, highly popular YouTube podcast known for interviewing controversial figures. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Wearing minimal makeup to appear sympathetic, but still sporting a designer logo on her sweater, Rebecca had tried to cry on camera, claiming she was just a naive girl, manipulated by an older, powerful man. She claimed she had no idea the Cartier bracelets and the Ferrari were bought with stolen pension funds. The internet, armed with receipts, eviscerated her. TikTokers pulled up her old Instagram posts, the ones where she bragged about securing the bag and mocked poor people. Body language experts on YouTube broke down her podcast interview, pointing out her lack of genuine tears and her constant deflection of responsibility. When the prosecution called Rebecca to the stand as a hostile witness, the live chat on the trial stream moved so fast it was unreadable. Under oath, terrified of perjury charges, Rebecca cracked. She admitted that Jared had frequently laughed about forging client signatures. She admitted that he told her Erin was too stupid to understand the money, and that he was freely moving funds to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She threw him under the bus with a vicious, self-serving speed that left Jared staring at her in slack-jawed horror. But the true climax of the trial, the moment that shattered viewership records across the platform, was the day Erin Vance took the stand. She walked into the courtroom, looking like the personification of justice. She wore a perfectly tailored, modest navy blue suit by the row. She carried no designer handbag. She wore no jewelry save for her vintage watch. She walked to the witness box with a steady, unhurried gait, swearing the oath with a clear, resonant voice. The YouTube live chat momentarily paused its relentless trolling, replaced by a wave of respect. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Delilah Vance, no relation, a coincidence the internet loved, approached the podium. "Ms. Vance, Can you describe your role in the creation of the algorithm used by Foster Wealth Management? I was its sole architect and author, Erin replied smoothly. I designed the predictive models, wrote the source code, and maintained the cryptographic security ledgers for the first 8 years of its deployment. Jared's public defender attempted a desperate cross-examination, trying to float the defense's only remaining narrative, that the computer system had simply malfunctioned, and Jared was a victim of a technological glitch he didn't understand. "Ms. Vance," the defense attorney stammered, sweating under the courtroom lights, "isn't it true that predictive algorithms are prone to errors? That a simple bug in your code could have caused these massive financial losses, and my client was simply trying to navigate a technological disaster?" Erin looked at the defense attorney, then slowly turned her gaze to Jared. Jared shrank back in his chair. "An algorithm is a mirror, counselor," Erin said, her voice echoing in the dead, silent courtroom. "It only executes the commands it is given. I have reviewed the server logs provided to the SEC. There was no glitch. There was no bug. There were manual, deliberate overrides. User ID, J. Foster admin, executed 72 unauthorized transfers over a period of 18 months, bypassing the risk management protocols I instituted to funnel capital into high-risk, unvetted private equity real estate deals." She paused, ensuring every word landed with the weight of a gavel. "The math did exactly what it was told to do," Erin concluded. "It documented the theft perfectly. Mr. Foster simply assumed no one would ever check the math." The live chat erupted into a frenzy of fire emojis and gavel icons. The clip of her testimony, "The math did exactly what it was told to do," was immediately clipped, set to dramatic music, and uploaded to TikTok, where it garnered 10 million views in 4 hours. Jared buried his face in his hands. The trial was effectively over. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all 47 counts. On a warm, clear Tuesday evening, exactly 2 years after Erin had signed away $30 million in a Century City conference room, the sprawling, architectural marvel of the Walt Disney Concert Hall in downtown Los Angeles was illuminated by soft, golden spotlights. It wasn't a party for a tech launch. It wasn't a gaudy, self-congratulatory gala like the ones Jared used to throw. It was a private reception hosted by Vance Analytics. Inside the stunning, sweeping wooden curves of the main hall, there were no paparazzi, no influencers, and no reality TV stars. The guests were retired school teachers from Pasadena, a union of firefighters from Long Beach, and small business owners from the Valley. They were the 42 families whose lives had been financially decimated by Jared Foster. Erin stood on the small stage at the front of the room. She wore a stunning, emerald green silk dress, her posture relaxed, a genuine warm smile radiating across her face. 2 years ago, a profound breach of trust occurred. Erin spoke into the microphone, her voice carrying over the quiet, emotional crowd. A system designed to protect your futures was weaponized to steal them. For a long time, I believed that because I didn't steal the money myself, I carried no blame. But I have learned that true responsibility isn't just about what you don't do. It's about what you have the power to fix. She gestured to a massive screen behind her. It didn't show abstract art or corporate logos. It showed a transparent, blockchain-verified ledger. Through the success of Vance Analytics and the unwavering partnership of Sterling Dynamics, our restitution fund has reached its primary benchmark, Erin announced, her voice thick with emotion. As of this morning, every single dollar of principal capital stolen by Foster Wealth Management has been officially wired back into your heavily secured, transparently managed trust accounts. You are whole again. A stunned silence washed over the room, followed a second later by the sound of weeping. A retired firefighter in the front row stood up and began to clap. Soon, the entire room was on its feet, a thunderous, tearful standing ovation echoing through the acoustic perfection of the concert hall. Erin nodded, pressing her hand to her heart, tears finally welling in her own eyes. This was the closure she had been fighting for. Not the destruction of her ex-husband, but the restoration of the innocent. Later that evening, as the guests departed with their financial futures secured, Erin stepped out onto the upper balcony of the hall. The air was crisp, the Los Angeles skyline glittering in the distance against a cloudless, star-swept sky. Joshua stepped out onto the balcony, handing her a glass of vintage champagne. "I just got off the phone with our legal liaison," Joshua said, leaning against the polished steel railing next to her. "Jared's sentencing came down this afternoon. FCI Terminal Island. 15 years in federal lockup. No possibility of early parole for white-collar crimes under the new federal sentencing guidelines." Erin took a sip of her champagne, looking out over the city lights. She felt no vindictive joy, only a profound sense of finality. And Grace? Rebecca? Grace had to sell the Calabasas estate to pay off her own creditors. She's renting a small condo in Encino. Rebecca's attempt at a lifestyle brand went bankrupt last week due to lack of sponsors, Joshua reported, his tone analytical but deeply satisfied. The market corrects itself. Just like you said. Erin turned to look at Joshua. Over the past 2 years, their professional partnership had evolved into something far deeper. It was a relationship built on the solid bedrock of mutual respect, shared intellect, and an uncompromising dedication to truth. There were no games, no manipulations, no shadows. "We did good work today, Joshua," Erin said softly. "You did good work, Erin," he corrected her, reaching out to gently brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was warm and grounding. "I just provided the scaffolding. You built the monument." "I think," Erin smiled, stepping slightly closer to him, the space between them humming with quiet, assured electricity, "that I'm finally ready to stop looking at the past data and start forecasting the future." Joshua smiled back, raising his glass. "I hear the projections are highly favorable." They clinked their glasses together under the clear California sky. The karma had been delivered, ruthless and absolute, broadcast to the world as a digital warning. But for Erin Vance, the real victory wasn't the billionaire's private jet, the viral fame, or the destruction of her enemies. The real victory was the unshakable, hard-won piece of a clean slate, written in the indelible ink of the truth. And that is how Erin Vance turned a devastating betrayal into a billion-dollar empire built on radical transparency. She proved that when you strip away the flashy cars, the fake smiles, and the hollow arrogance, the truth is the only currency that actually appreciates in value. Jared thought she was walking away with nothing, completely unaware that he had just handed her the keys to his own destruction. True karma isn't just a cosmic accident. Sometimes it's a perfectly calculated algorithm of consequences driven by a woman who refuses to be a victim. If you loved this story of cold, hard karma, fierce redemption, and the ultimate financial glow-up, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that taking the high road always pays off, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another dramatic story. What would you have done in Erin's shoes? Let me know in the comments below.